Hey there, I'm Kristi Key, and I am one of the GMs for hire for Mastermind Adventures. In this video, what I'm going to be doing is a Session 0. And for those of you who don't know, a Session 0 is basically in Dungeons and Dragons what you do before you start playing. It's for character building, going over the rules, talking about what the campaign might be like, giving the players a chance to communicate with each other about what kind of characters they want to make, and to ask any questions they might want to ask the game master. In this session, I'm going to be meeting with my wonderful friends, the Vanderroads family. None of them have ever played before, so a Session 0 is that much more important because you want to give people a chance to ask some questions they may have had and to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the game. When an entire party has never played before, there's a lot of new information to go over. In this video, we're going to go over as much of it as we possibly can, hopefully answer some of their questions, but it won't be building an entire character. I want to leave them with some things to think about so that they can go off and build characters of their own. And then we'll communicate between now and when we actually have our first playing session. So this is a whole new group of people. None of them have ever played D&D before, and I'm going to start talking to them about how the game's going to go. Here we go. Okay. Thank you all for joining me for our Session 0 for an inconceivable adventure. Did your mom read to you the adventure brief? Do you know what the adventure we're getting into is? No. Okay. So great. Yes, something something Princess Bride. Perfect. I'm gonna read it to you, and I'm gonna channel my best Peter Falk for the occasion, as is required. So, let me say this before I jump into this. So, what we're gonna do tonight, we're not playing tonight. What we're doing tonight is what people call a Session 0, which is basically just we're gonna work on talking about because none of you have ever played, right? Right. Have any of you ever watched people playing or sat in on a session? Sure, yeah, YouTube counts. You've watched people play on YouTube or Twitch or something like that. D&D is a hard game to describe unless you've sort of watched gameplay or listened to gameplay because it doesn't really work like other games you might have played. It doesn't function kind of even like a video game RPG because there's a limited number of options even in a video game RPG. It doesn't work like a board game. It's kind of its own thing, which is my favorite part of it because it means that the only limits are the limits of the creativity of the players and the dungeon master, so you can have a whole lot of fun. The stuff we're going to cover tonight is going to be enabling us to get some characters ready for this little one-shot campaign that we're going to do. It's probably going to seem like a lot of work for what's ultimately going to be like a 2-hour game session, but it's still okay because it's going to teach you guys how to do this. So the next time you play D&D, you'll know how to create those characters, how to go about looking at those characters, and who knows, we may have so much fun in the one shot. If we don't finish, we might want to keep playing, or you might want to keep playing with those same characters or something like that. So the the rules we're going to be playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Dungeons and Dragons has been out around for a long time, and they're on the 5th edition, and that's the one I like best. I'm not just playing it because it's the most recent. Like, I think I wouldn't say they've gotten better every time. I didn't love 4th edition, but 5th edition I think has got a lot right. And to me, a lot of what it has right is the focus on role playing. As you start playing, you're going to figure out how you like sessions to go, and depending on the players and the dungeon master, sessions can go really, really differently. My sessions tend to be really heavy on role play, which is I like to let my characters explore the world. I like to have detailed worlds. I like them to get to know each other and explore each other. Some people, when they play, they just kind of like to go from battle to battle to battle to battle, and that's fine too. You just got to find the group that works for you. But yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. Absolutely. That's a great example. And I've played in a lot of campaigns, and the players and dungeon masters that are the best to play with are the ones who understand that yes and concept of improv. Chris, I know you get that. Sarah, Peter, you guys know what we're talking about? The yes end of improv? Yeah. Peter, you too? I know, born and raised a theater kid. I know. Peter, how about you? Do you know what we mean? Sort of. Okay, so yes, and when you're doing improv, when people are trying to do improv together, because they're working together, the idea is a good improv scene is created when the people in the scene are accepting the offering that the other person gives them. And an offering could be anything like, oh man, it's a hot day out today. Yes would be saying, oh my gosh, I know, and the air conditioner in our house is broken and I'm going downtown for ice, right? Because then you're building. So you're agreeing with the idea that it's hot today, and you're then adding something else to the scene that the other player could go with. So that's the yes and the end. Bad improviser would do something like, what are you talking about? No, it's not. Or, I don't, this is the coldest day in the history of mankind, so and D&D, like your dad said, is absolutely yes and. There's no winning and losing like other games, which is why I say like it's not like video games and board games where there's winning is kind of staying alive. But even then, we're gonna spend an hour tonight creating characters, or at least getting them started. Maybe we'll jumpstart them, and then you'll keep thinking about them, and you'll finish them on your own time. And level 1 characters, which is what we're gonna create, are really weak and they could die. I had a character I created for a campaign. I was really into this idea of making a dragonborn monk. I'll explain that a little bit more to you in a bit. I think I wrote a 7-page backstory on this character. I had like family, history, how she came to be in the monastery she was in, the bit about her dragon ancestry. And in her first skirmish, she didn't even get to her turn in the turn order yet. She got hit once and she died. I'm going to explain the mechanics of all that to you a little bit more tonight, but that was the end of that character. I didn't lose because I just rolled up another character, and actually I'm still playing that character and I love her. She's one of my favorite characters. So there's no losing as long as you're contributing and playing and having fun. But yeah, absolutely. It's not a... Good dungeon masters are there like wanting you to succeed. They're gonna play and have it go so that it's challenging for you. Making it so that you could never die would be really boring because it wouldn't be challenging to you. But they're not there to kill you. They're there to just kind of guide your way. And you guys are definitely a team. So the 4 of you are going to be a team on this, and I'm part of the team. I'm just a slightly different part of the team. So what I'll do first, because I do want to give you a sense of what the adventure we're getting. I think it's good to know, if you can. It's not necessary, but it helps sometimes to know what adventure you're going into, so you can help think of what kind of character you want to make. I'm in a campaign right now where you're escaping from the Underdark, which is basically where all underground and dark, and where dark elves and a lot of these sort of underground characters live, and everything is dark. So I was at first thinking I'm going to create a human for this campaign, and then humans don't have dark vision, so I would have just been constantly having to light torches or holding on to a buddy's shoulder, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make sure I have a race that has dark vision. So that's why I think it helps kind of to know what campaign you're going into. So the first thing I'll do is I'll read the intro, and then we'll just jump back into mechanics. So again, in my best Peter Falk, which I don't know how that's going to be, but here it goes. There is unrest in the kingdom of Florin. It's been 7 years since the king has died, and his son, Prince Humperdinck, having been disinherited by his father and mother and deemed unfit to rule, is nowhere to be found. A test was set, a series of unknown challenges, and whomever should pass the test would be the new king or queen of Florin. Pretty standard royalty stuff, really. The royal seat of Florin has been vacant these 7 years, and no one has dared to take the test. Conditions in the kingdom of Florin have gotten worse and worse, and while the need for a new, kind, and just ruler has increased, the morale of the people has decreased, making it all the less likely that a new ruler would present themselves. The only hope the people have is a young man with 4 fingers on his left hand who claims he is at last ready to face the trials. Although the desperate people treat him warmly, he is angry and vengeful. He wants to be king, but his real goal is to find the man who killed his father. In addition to all this, the ever-looming fear of the dread pirate Roberts haunts the people of Florin and keeps them from fleeing the land. No one seems to know anyone who has been killed or injured by this legendary blackguard, but the stories of his cruelty abound, and no one wants to end up on the wrong side of his wrath. Finally, it is rumored that the neighboring kingdom of Gilder is preparing to invade. The people of Florin need a strong and just ruler more than ever, and it looks like young Tyrone Rugen Jr. is their only hope. Will he pass the trials? Will he be a kind and good leader? Can he stop an invasion by Gilder? The times are uncertain indeed. You answer an advertisement looking for members of the Brute Squad to guard the feast that the people are throwing in honor of Count Rugen Jr. It is here that your adventure begins. That was a very bad Peter Falk, but I hope it set the right... Thanks, Craig. I hope it set... So that's the adventure that we're starting. So that's all you know. So with the characters you create, for whatever reason, they're going to have a need to have volunteered to be on this Brute Squad. So that doesn't mean that you can't create a character who is nobility, but you're going to want to answer yourself the question of why might my character have answered this advertisement to be on the Brute Squad. Maybe that means your character is in disguise as someone who's poor and needs the money, and they've disguised themselves so that they can get to something. But that's where the adventure is going to start. You have answered an advertisement to be on the Brute Squad, and the Brute Squad has been hired to just sort of keep peace at this feast being held in honor of Count Tyrone Rugen Jr. So, as we talk about characters, I would say the main couple of things that we're going to focus on are going to be class and race. So in D&D, race is going to mean, are you a human? Are you an elf? Are you a dwarf? You know, it's not the same, but it helps sometimes if you need a reference to think Lord of the Rings, right? You had the Fellowship, and you had the humans, you had the dwarves, you had the elves, and then of course there's the halflings were the hobbits. You have half elves, you have half orcs. You could be an orc, and we're going to go over the list of different options you have for different races. Each race has different advantages. I don't know that I'd necessarily say disadvantage, but like I mentioned to you, humans are great. Humans are a pretty versatile race to play. They don't have dark vision, so if you know you're going to be playing a campaign where you're planning to be somewhere in the dark a lot, like my Out of the Abyss campaign, picking a human would be a disadvantage. So they each have their strong suits and their weaknesses, and you can decide. Now, when I start making a character, I'll talk about class in a second, but I think the most important thing is to just think a little bit about who you want to play, and then you can pick the race and the class sort of building on that. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. Different dungeon masters ask their players to do it differently. I know people who think that the best thing to do is to roll ability scores, which I'm going to explain in a bit, but they roll their numbers first and then they create their characters based on that. I'm the opposite. I'm like, think about who you want to play, figure out what race and class that makes sense for you to be, and then assign your ability scores accordingly. So you play with me, I'll suggest a certain series of things. You play with another dungeon master, they may tell you something different. But the way I like to do it is, you want to play somebody who hopefully isn't going to die in their first session by getting one-shotted like my Dragonborn monk. So pick somebody you're interested in playing. Think about the circumstances that I've just given you and who you might want to be. And then the race and the class you can pick from there. So I said race, so the other thing that's big is class. Class, think about as not so much a profession, but it is kind of your vocation, maybe more like. So, class is going to be, are you a wizard, which is somebody who's going to be casting a lot of spells, someone who's got a lot of intelligence and knowledge and learns and studies spells that they can cast. Do you want to be a rogue? That's someone who's going to be a spy, maybe someone who spent a lot of time with thieves and things like that, and who, is not necessarily the biggest and toughest, but they're good at sneaking up behind you or picking locks or things like that. Do you want to be a cleric who is someone who's in touch with their god and as a result has magic from that and can heal and can help people? It's really good to have someone in your party who can heal. Just throwing that out there. Not necessary, but good. Do you want to be a bard who, while everybody else is going stabby, 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 the bard is in the background with the lute playing music that inspires everybody else in their party to greatness, or they play a song that makes somebody drop to the floor in anguish. So there's all these different classes, and we'll go through some of them. I do want to jump into D&D Beyond. Have you guys had a chance to jump into that yet? That's okay. We'll do it. We'll do it together now. So if you guys want to go to, it's dndbeyond.com. And yeah, you can either click the link I sent or you can go to dndbeyond.com. Once you've created an account, I actually want you to, at the top, there's going to be a part that says, scrolling across the top, it says collections, game rules, sources, tools. Everybody see what I'm talking about? Okay. What's that? D&D Beyond, yeah. So the top says D&D Beyond, search everything, and then below it says collections, game rules. Okay. So under game rules, if you hover your mouse over that, do you see where it says classes? Cool. So we'll really quickly right now together look at each of the classes, but I'll pause and do this real quick too. So basically, since a couple of you have watched and a couple of you haven't, this might be a little redundant to Sarah and Peter, but for Greg and Chris, you haven't really seen gameplay. It is, or I guess Greg, you did say a little bit because you were saying you noticed it was like improv and stuff like that. Okay, so I haven't. So I have of all the shows I've seen that have had D&D, I've never seen a show that had D&D in a way that I thought represented D&D, but I've heard people say that it kind of does in Stranger Things, but I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it accurately portrays. Greg, are you talking? You're muted. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the good old days back in the day when we could all gather together and be in person. Yeah, totally. Yep, I have my little bag of minis that is sitting. Normally, something I would have told you all to do before a session zero would have been to go out and get a collection of these, which I'll hold them up to the computer. Are you're not gonna need them. I still oddly love them. I love the tactile feel of rolling dice, and sometimes on an important roll, I'll want to use my dice. But with all the technology these days, you don't need them because we're going to be able to roll dice virtually. And the good thing about that is if you're ever playing with people who you don't trust, everybody can see everybody's rolls, so you don't have to worry about anybody fudging. But so the way gameplay works is you're given a situation, the world is described to you a little bit, as I just did. When we actually jump in, I'll go into a little bit more detail, and you're given a set of circumstances. And the number one question a DM ever asks, or a GM ever asks, is, okay, so what do you do? From these characters that we're going to create tonight, or that we're going to begin creating tonight, you're going to be able to improv anything. And again, unlike board games or video games, you don't have you don't have the choose your own adventure. Do you go into the tunnel? Do you go back where you came? And then you've got 4 options and you take one and that's it. you can do whatever you want. Again, you're going to have certain objectives and you're going to be wanting to work towards them as a team. I always tell people that you're welcome to create characters that are evil, chaotic evil, lawful evil. That's totally fine, but think about the fact that you do need to to make a successful campaign, you got to have some reason for sort of working collaboratively towards a collective end. So you can create yourself an evil character, and that's just fine, but you might want to think about the fact that that character is going to need something that pulls them into working with others. Because if everybody's like, okay, the bad guy, the goblins just attacked, we're all going to fight them, and your character's like, I join the goblins and kill all the villagers, it's going to get annoying and boring for you really fast, because then you're just fighting against each other. So that said, there's nothing wrong with having an evil character who's like, I see these other people as a means to my end. If I can control the land through them, then I'll just dispatch them in the end and take whatever your hook is. But it does help also when creating a character to think about things like the same way you would think when creating a character for an acting role. Ask yourselves those acting questions like, what does my character want? Don't just create your character in the now. Give your character a bit of a backstory. What led your character to this moment? Why are they here now? What is it that they're hoping for from their life, from this situation that they're in this moment? What are their flaws? Are they afraid of heights? Are they afraid of falling in love? All of that stuff, the more you give your character, even if they do get one-shotted and killed, it's still just going to make it that much easier for you to roleplay your character and that much more fun to play. So the GM's going to do a lot of asking you, okay, so what do you do? And you get to make that up. You're going to have some weapons, you're going to have some feats, some abilities, some things that you know that your character can do, and you can use those to try to achieve what your character wants. Then situations are going to unfold around you, and your characters are going to get to react to that. Typically, parties stay more or less together, but people can split. Okay, I'm going to go off and do this while everybody else is doing that. You can do that. Again, it's all just improv. So, fighting. The other thing I want to talk about before we start getting into the specifics of the classes, which is one of the main things we're going to focus on tonight, is fighting. Here's the way fighting works in Dungeons and Dragons. The game kind of just moves along as improving, interacting, the dungeon master guiding you along until there's a situation where actual battle occurs. Now that situation may occur because an enemy starts attacking you, or it may occur because you start attacking an enemy. In any event, your GM is going to say to you, when battle begins, your GM is going to say to you, okay, roll initiative. Once we build your character sheets, you're going to have a number that gives you a bonus for your initiative. And initiative is basically just the order that you go in combat. Thinking about it in real world terms, it's kind of like everybody is going at practically the same time. A round of combat, meaning Greg goes, then Sarah goes, then Chris goes, then Peter goes. A round of combat is 6 seconds. So it's happening really fast, even though what may happen in real life is we may take 15 minutes to get through everyone's actions and things like that. But a round of combat is 6 seconds. But you'll roll initiative to determine what order you go in. I'll roll initiative for any bad guys. You don't necessarily know what order that is. Sometimes I put it up on the screen. Sometimes I just keep it in my little book, depending on how I feel like running combat that day. And then on your turn, you get a movement, which is what it sounds like. It's how far you can move. So if, the goblin is up at the top of the hill and you're at the bottom of the hill and you want to hit it with your sword, you'll need to move to it in order to get to it, unless you want to hit it with your bow and arrow, in which case you don't necessarily need to. You'll know how far you can move once you've built your character. Again, that's things like racial traits, is how far your character can move on a given round. But so you get a movement and you get an action. An action could be an attack. It could be, sometimes it's things like, I have to wield this certain weapon that I wasn't previously wielding, and it takes an action to do it. if you've fallen down, it takes an action to get up, things like that. So you get an action, a movement, and again, depending on what your character looks like in the end, sometimes you get certain bonus actions, and you're going to know all of that once you've built your character. This D&D Beyond website that I have steered you to is the best thing that ever happened to D&D, in my opinion, because it makes making characters so easy. All that stuff that you used to have to, it's like a calculator. If Dungeons and Dragons were math, D&D Beyond is like the calculator, so you don't have to do all the scribbling and math in your head. It's great. And so it's going to help you know how much movement do I have, what are my bonus actions, if any, and things like that. So if you cast a spell, that's an action. So that's what happens on your move. And then you'll get your move, the end of your turn will come, and then it'll be the next person's. And again, a round of combat where everybody's had their turn in the real time of the game is like 6 seconds. So it's all happening very quickly. Does that make sense? Kind of. Any questions about that? So far, it makes sense. Once we're in it and we're doing it, we'll feel it out and we'll go through it together. But okay, so let's look at the classes briefly a little bit. I'll bring you back to D&D Beyond. So 2 things that are going to be really important as you build your character are your AC, which stands for armor class, and your HP, which stands for hit points. So your armor class is basically your what you can take, your armor. So it doesn't necessarily mean literal armor. For example, monks are sort of very naturally, they're in touch with the universe and they have natural power, so they have a decent AC, but they don't wear any armor. Monks do better without. They're the only class that no armor on a monk is better. If a monk has any armor, it actually lowers their AC. So, whereas with most character, imagine if you're wearing chainmail or leather armor or plate mail, you're potentially able to endure more of a barrage of attacks. So that's your armor class. It's going to be a number, and it's important because, as you know, Dungeons and Dragons is a dice-based game. So when an enemy tries to attack you, they're going to roll. And I might say to you, hey, Sarah, what's your armor class? What's your AC? And you're going to look at your character sheet and you're going to say, oh, my AC is 14. If I rolled a 14 or above, I hit you. If I rolled a 13 or below, I miss. Ties always go to the attacker, which is awesome when you're the attacker, but not so great when you're being attacked. But anyway, so that's what your armor class is. Does that make sense? Questions? Cool. And as you level up, your AC can go up, or as you add, if you acquire armor and things like that, your AC can go up. The other thing I said is HP, which is your hit points. Hit points are basically how much life you have. Think of them as, the mushrooms in Mario or the hearts in Zelda. And your HP is how much you have until you are unconscious and then dead. I'll talk about that in a second too. But so again, yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. It's, are you going to get hit or are you not going to get hit? That's what armor class is, exactly. So, Greg, let's say you make a barbarian and your AC is pretty decently high at level 1. Let's say you've got like an AC of 18 because of the armor you have and because of the other things you've chosen. That's a hard character to hit, 18 on a 20-sided dice, which is typically what's getting rolled to try to hit you. Now, granted, there are bonuses and things like that, so that people add to the dice. But an 18's a pretty solid AC, because it means someone has to roll 18 or above in order to hit you. So they better have bonuses on whatever weapon they're trying to hit you with. And if they don't hit you, then you don't have to worry about what your hit points are, because you're not going to take damage because you don't get hit. So the idea then would be the way it plays out in gameplay, and I like to go for the role play of it. So I'll roll, let's say, the goblin. I keep using goblins as examples because in regular D&D they're a pretty common low level enemy. So the goblin, I say, okay, he's gonna try to pierce you with his sword, and I roll a 16, but your barbarian is fierce, and and I'll say, Greg, what's your AC? And you'll say it's 18, and I'll say, yeah, the goblin actually, like, swipes at you, but you manage to just sort of like hold your hand out, and the goblin can't even reach you as he swipes you with your sword. So again, you won't have to worry about your hit points in that case because you don't get hit. So having a high AC is great because it prevents you from taking damage. Having high hit points is great because when you do take damage, you can live for longer. Let me explain rest to you also. Dungeons and Dragons has created a mechanism where you do have to take rests. It hasn't created a mechanism where you have to do realistic things like shower and go to the bathroom, and I'm not going to make you because I don't want any part of that. But it has tried to add in the reality enough that you will have to take rests. So, for example, if you're someone who is a magical character, wizards, warlocks, sorcerers, bards, you will need to rest. You only have a certain number of what they call spell slots. So you can only cast so many spells before you're out of spells, and you will need to take either a short rest or a long rest in order to get some of those spells back. Typically speaking, a long rest gets you everything back. It's also how you get your health back if you aren't actually taking healing potions or getting spells of healing cast on you. So if you all end up in a battle and you come out victorious, but you're each down to your last 5 hit points, you may have another battle just around the corner, but by God, you're going to want to find somewhere to go and take a rest. Because when you rest, you'll get those hit points back. I'm talking about death. So again, your character gets hit. Your character keeps getting hit. Your character keeps getting hit. And then all of a sudden you go, whoa, I'm down to 0 hit points. Or maybe you were at 5 hit points and then somebody does 15 damage on you. And suddenly you're down to what would be less than 0 hit points. You might think that that means you're dead. It doesn't. For you, at least, the characters, the player characters, we call them, it would mean you're unconscious. The only way that it's an instant death is if you get hit for double what your hit points are. That's very rare outside of anywhere but level 1, and even level 1, it's unlikely to happen. But let's say you have 10 hit points because you're a level 1 character, and you're at full hit points, and somebody deals you 20 hit points of damage, that would be an instant death because you've gone below double. Again, that only happens while you're still up and kicking and conscious. So if you have 10 hit points, but you get dealt 10 hit points of damage or 11 hit points of damage, you don't have to then keep adding. In Dungeons and Dragons, people don't typically keep hacking at you once you're down, so the assumption is you are level at unconscious. And then there's a thing called death saves. So basically, you're going to have 3 rounds to roll. If this happens to you guys, I'll explain it on the fly how it works, but you'll have 3 rounds to roll, and basically you're going to roll a d20. 10 and up means you save, 9 and below means you fail, and if you fail 3 times in a row, you die. And then you're dead. Then that's deadsies, gonzo, no coming back, not mostly dead, although maybe in this campaign, depending. We'll have to see just how dead somebody could be before they had a chance. But so that's how death works. Anybody have any questions about that? Consciousness, death? Cool. So yeah, as you work on, as you start thinking about the types of characters that you want to make, it helps to talk to each other, particularly since you all live in the same house. You can, hey, what are you planning? Well, I want to be the tank, so I'm thinking about being a barbarian. Yeah, I like that barbarians can fly into rages and do extra damage and be extra impervious and stuff. That's cool. Doesn't mean you can't be another fighting type character, but it's good to know that there's going to be one of those. If you want, you can also think about your relationships to each other. Okay, are you a pair of barbarian brothers who, like, that's your thing? You storm the countryside just being, fierce, and or is one the barbarian and one is the wizard who's very intellectual and quiet and doesn't like rushing into battle, likes to stay back, but cast spells from a distance quietly while his brother's in the fray banging stuff down with his fists and swords and stuff like that. Maybe some of you have known each other before this campaign starts. Maybe you're all meeting for the first time as members of the Brute Squad. that's going to be entirely up to you. You do whatever is exciting to you and fun and interesting to you. Yeah, so I recommend to people who are first time players, there are some classes that are more challenging to play than others. The video that I have sent you, and I'll show you where I sent it to you in a minute, I'll put it in the Zoom chat too, but I think actually does a really good job. I agree almost universally with the guy's assessments of which classes are challenging, and what he breaks down which ones he thinks are easier and which ones he thinks are more challenging. I typically recommend staying away from some of the harder classes just because there's enough new rules and mechanisms and things you're learning to begin with. You don't need to be looking at the sorcerer and scrolling through pages of the way his magic works and how he can cast and that stuff. So if you want, I can chat with you as we go through about... I guess I'll say, have any of you looked at some of these already? Do any of you have things like, yeah, I know I want to play someone who's kind of sneaky and underhanded, or, oh, I loved the idea of bard, I like the idea of someone who's musical and does damage or inspires his friends with that. Anybody have any thoughts they were thinking already? Hey, it's Blue. Yeah, but that's cool. I love that that's Grog, was it? Krog. Okay. Did anybody else have things they were thinking about and they're not sure what class or race might fit best? I'm gonna put Robin Banks. Do I sense that you want to be a rogue? Yeah, rogues are great. I think rogues are an pretty easy class to play. They don't really have any magic. At higher levels, you can obtain some if you choose, although not necessarily. Rogues might be my favorite class to play. So I like that a lot. Yeah, again, typically they don't have to be. The rogue in my campaign, her family essentially was killed by an evil organization that was ruling the land. Her brother died in a battle, and now she's trained as a spy and assassin, and she's working undercover for that organization with the end goal of destroying it and taking it down from the inside. So she had to learn all the... So she's certainly not evil. She's good. She's spending her whole campaign trying to save other innocent people from the evil forces of the world that remind her of the evil forces that killed her family. So you can't... But, you don't necessarily have to be, is what I'm saying. You don't have to be boxed in by what you think. If you want to be someone who's just like... Yeah, I've definitely played with a lot of characters whose goal is like... How much money can I get? Bring me the money. Whatever job I have to do, whatever throat I have to slit. Does it pay well? Great. So Robin Banks. Okay, cool. So yeah, if that's what you're looking for, Rogue is going to end up being the right class for you, Sarah. I would say. Anybody else have any thoughts? Peter, you were saying you wanted to be a tank, right? Yeah, I would recommend Barbarian if you want to be someone who like goes in, does a lot of damage. Barbarians are going to give you a high AC. They're going to give you a high HP. They're gonna be the ones who go in and mess stuff up. They have this thing called Rage where you just go, yeah, I fly into a rage, and it increases all sorts of things for you. So that becomes pretty cool. Chris, any thoughts or any classes that instead of going into every one, maybe we could... Yeah. Good. Yeah, so druids are cool because druids have they're very in touch with nature. Druids tend to have familiars, so you could have a little animal of your choice that is like your little sidekick, your little buddy. At certain levels and with certain abilities, you even can. Were you reading about? Yeah, you can turn into animals. So it's druids are pretty cool. Why don't I have you guys go into if you go into collections. So we went into game rules and we looked at the different classes. If you go into collections, you'll see it says my characters. You guys see what I'm talking about? Cool. Go ahead and click that, and go ahead and click create a character. So yeah, so this website that's RPG Bot is awesome. So for example, if I were Greg and I was like, okay, I know I want to play a half orc, but I haven't thought too much beyond that about it. I would go to RPG Bot and I would go to races and I would click, oops, hang on. Sorry, I would click half orc and I would look at what compatible races are considered to be for that. Now, again, this website, RPG Bot, that's just some folks who know the game really well saying, oh, if you want to be this kind of half-orc, here are some good classes. Being a barbarian is great because you already get strength increases as a half-orc, which really helps you as a barbarian because strength is your main ability. We're going to talk about abilities right now because they're important. So I love this website. You definitely don't need to adhere to it. It's just this one guy or this group of people, whoever created this website's opinions about what are things that go well together. And like I said, sometimes it's fun to do the thing that makes the most sense, and sometimes it's fun to go, I'm going to be the half-orc who just likes to pick flowers and recite poetry and also cast awesome wizard spells, which is not as common, but sometimes it can be fun to create that character. Okay, hold on. I'm going to it again because I'm actually going to pull up RPG Bot right now. So, yeah. If folks want to open that. And then similarly, so Sarah, if you're like, okay, I know I want to play a rogue. I know I want to be someone who's that kind of person, but I'm not sure what race makes the most sense. Again, you can go to RPG Bot. Now, this website, I'll mention to you, RPG Bot, it has everything. So you're gonna notice some classes and races that we aren't looking at on D&D Beyond. You're gonna be like, Aarakocra, what the heck is Aarakocra? That's a giant flying bird that is awesome. But again, we're gonna stick to the classic D&D 5e races and classes for our adventure, just to keep an already complicated thing as simple as we can. So again, if I were Sarah, I'd go to classes, I'd go to Rogue Handbook, and it's going to make all these great suggestions for me of things that are really good, things that are kind of good, things that it doesn't recommend as much. And then I might scroll down to races and go, okay, let's see, what are good rogue races? Aarakocra it thinks is good, but we're not playing with that, so what else? So on RPG Bot again, so blue means it's something that, again, this is just these people's opinion, but that these folks think are really good. Green are pretty good. Orange, okay. Red, they don't go together. Again, doesn't mean you have to stick to any of this. So if you're like, I want to play the half-orc wizard, don't let that stop you. If that's the character you've got in your head, the most important thing is that you're playing something that's interesting and exciting to you, and we can make it work. But so if I was like, okay, the first thing I want to do is think about what race do I want to play? And we're going to be talking about abilities, which are also really important in just a second. We haven't talked about that at all. But we'll start with races because we have talked about that. So maybe you are thinking, I want to be a rogue that's a dragonborn. As you see, it's got the dragonborn in red, though. So you go, I could do it, but they're not necessarily working super well together. Elf. Now you notice elf is black, but there's all these different kinds of elves. There's different what they call sub races and subclasses. So here are the different kinds that work really well. But as you can see, a lot of these elves are really good to go with rogue. So being a rogue elf is pretty good. Genasi. So, and again, a lot of these are things we aren't working with. So if you're seeing races that you aren't seeing on D&D Beyond, just in this case, skip over them. A lot of my campaigns I allow these, but since ours is just a simple one-shot. again, we're going into a lot of detail for what's going to be our ultimately 2-hour campaign, but I want to go through this with you because it's character creation for any time you play Dungeons and Dragons. So this is a helpful site for helping you find things that work really well together. So does that make sense for as you start looking at your character, ways to help? I love this website since I discovered it. I don't always go with its suggestions, and I have definitely sometimes found that I disagree with some of the things that it says, but it's pretty clutch. Let's talk about abilities for a second. Basically, your abilities are really important because they're going to basically define every role that you try to make, everything that you try to do as a character. The abilities are strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma. And there's 3 different ways that dungeon masters are going to tell their party to have their abilities. One is called standard array, which basically means there's a fixed series of predetermined numbers, and then it's just up to you to decide which number goes to which ability. So I think that's in standard array, I think it's 8, 10, 12, 14, and 15. And then again, you're going to determine those by the type of character you want to play. So certain characters want to make sure their intelligence is really high. If you're a bard, you want to make sure your charisma is going to be your highest. If you're a barbarian, you want your strength and your constitution to be really high. RPG Bot is a great website for helping you figure out which of those you want to. But hold on, I gotta find this because it's funny. I meant to have this pulled up before our campaign. I don't want to waste too much of your time. I know you guys have to go, but... Alright, let me see if I can just remember it off the top of my head. So, describing the different ones as it related to a tomato. Strength is your ability to crush a tomato. Dexterity is your ability to dodge a tomato that's thrown at you. Constitution is your... No, I'm gonna go in a different order. Intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. Wisdom is knowing never to make a tomato-based fruit salad. Constitution is the ability to stomach a tomato-based fruit salad without throwing up. And what have I skipped? Charisma? I don't remember what that one is. Your ability to juggle tomatoes, perhaps? But so that's the kind of I think funny breakdown of like what those different abilities are. Sometimes people get confused about what they do, what's the difference between constitution and strength and stuff like that. Does that tomato metaphor actually help kind of describe what each of those abilities does? So for example, Sarah, if you're going to make a rogue, unquestionably dexterity is going to be your most important ability, because your deal is you're ducking behind shadows, you're hiding, you're coming up behind somebody, you're putting a knife in their back, you're running around the corner, you're going through shadows. You need to be able to move dexterously. So, for a barbarian, you want your strength to be high because that's what you're doing. You're going in and you're messing stuff up. So, oh, there's the kitty cat. Hello, kitty cat. It doesn't like being held. So yeah, so barbarian, your strength and also your constitution. You're gonna have to take a lot, and you're gonna want to be tough enough and strong enough to be able to take it. So I talked a little bit about how you get these ability scores. So I said standard array is one way. We're not gonna do that because I think it's kind of boring. Another way is point buy. Point buy is basically you get a certain amount of points, and you can disseminate them pretty much however you want. So you could make yourself really, really, really stupid, but really, really, really tough if you wanted, or you could make yourself, really, really, really smart, but really, really, really frail, or you could make yourself super dexterous. So you get to determine how even you want to make your... There's a max and minimum and things like that, but you get to determine how you want to distribute those points so you can really create the character by yourself. That's what we're going to do for ease sake. The other way that I'll mention to you, just because you may have future dungeon masters who do it this way, it's actually my favorite way, but it's not the simplest, so it's not what we're going to do, is that you basically roll for it, and there's a series of dice that you have to roll, and you can discard the lowest roll and things like that. That's my favorite just because it's in your hands and you're doing it with the dice, and I like that. But we're going to do point buy. So as in D&D Beyond, at some point when you're creating that character, when you get to abilities, it's going to ask how you're distributing your abilities, and you guys are going to select point buy. So again, that just means it's going to tell you you've got these maximum points. At that point, you're going to have already chosen your race, your class. You're going to get certain bonuses because of your race and your class to certain abilities like that. And then you're going to distribute the points to the different abilities the way that you want them to. So that's abilities. Now, you also are going to have, and you're going to notice on your character sheet, things called skills. So the abilities are your core, but how well you do on those abilities, or how high marked you are on those abilities, they're going to go into your skills. Skills are going to be things like your knowledge of history, your acrobatics ability, your athletics ability, your perception, how perceptive are you, your ability to investigate, your ability to persuade, your ability to deceive. There's a whole list of skills. As you create your character, it's going to ask, depending again on what race and class you pick, on certain backstories that you're going to pick. All of this is prompted to you really easily in D&D Beyond, and each of those things has certain things it's going to give you. If your rogue, Sarah, is going to be the kind of rogue who is mostly sort of exploratory and is going to be the one that goes on ahead of the party to check for traps and try to pick locks on doors, and then is going to fall back and let the barbarian rush in, you're going to want to make sure you have high points for investigation, for perception. If your rogue is the kind of rogue that is going to go in and say, oh yes, my name is Joe Smith, and I'm here from the Bureau of this, and I'd like to lie to you. You know, if you are someone who's going to use your roguish ways to deceive, to infiltrate organizations that you don't belong in, you're going to want to make sure you have high points in persuasion and deception. So again, that's why, for me, I like to think about, as I've said many times, the character that I'm going to create, because that's going to tell you how you want to distribute all these points when you get them. And D&D Beyond is awesome, because it's going to prompt you. It's going to prompt you on all of these things. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. Does anybody have any basic questions about that stuff now? All right, so here's what I'd say. In the interest of not keeping you for super long, I'm sorry, I know it's an hour. An hour goes by in D&D like nobody's business. So here's what I would say. Spend some time in D&D Beyond. Look over each of the races. Since we didn't get as much time in that, start with that. But D&D Beyond is great because it gives you very easily quick descriptions, and then you can click more details. So spend some time thinking about the race and class that you want to play. Go through each of these, look through all of them, and then once you feel like you've got a sense of what you want to do, you're going to go up to My Characters, and you're going to click Create a Character. And D&D Beyond is awesome because it's going to prompt you all the way through. You're going to click Standard when it asks your character creation method, and you're going to jump in at the character's level. We're starting at level 1. Start with a name if you want. Don't start with a name. It's up to you. You don't have to commit to a name right now. But follow the prompts. It's going to ask you for a lot of the stuff we just talked about. When it asks you for your race, it's going to automatically fill in certain stuff for you. When it asks you for your class, it's going to fill in a bunch of stuff for you. It's going to ask you for a background. The background is going to be stuff like, are you a noble? Are you a far traveler? Those things have different bonuses as well. So maybe one of them gives you an extra language that you'd know. If you're an elf, you're going to obviously speak Elven. Common is sort of the language that is well, it's the common language. It's the language that if people speak a universal language, that language is common. I think all of you are going to start with the language common, and then probably at least one other language. In our little campaign, probably languages aren't going to necessarily be a thing you have to super focus on and worry about. I think most people you're are going to speak common. Maybe a couple other languages, but in longer campaigns, knowing a lot of languages can be super, super helpful. In ours, I wouldn't worry about it as much. But having extra skill proficiencies are great. So as you look through the different backgrounds and things like that, that is helpful stuff to keep in mind. So certain backgrounds might give you an extra skill proficiency. You might want to take that. It's a lot. It sounds really complicated. Has this helped, though? Has this illuminated any of the questions you had? It's a start. It's a start. There's a lot to it. So here's also what I'd say. In between now and when we play, let's be in communication. If you're having thoughts, hey, Kristi, I was thinking this was the type of barbarian I wanted to create. So he's going to be a dragonborn. This is his name. This is his backstory. I was wondering if he could have this or could do that, or I'm confused about what abilities I should pick. So just email me and say, this is what I was thinking, or I'm confused about this. I went into D&D Beyond and it gave me this prompt and I don't understand that. Let me know what you're thinking. We could do another, just one of you and me, we could do a quick phone call and we could go through it quickly together. But we'll try to do that before our first session, since it's only a one shot, since it's just 2 hours, we'll try to keep as much time. We didn't even get into syncing up Roll20 today, but that's going to be awesome because that's going to be the map that we share. So you guys are able to see the world that we're in and the map that we're on. So if you can just accept that invite between now and the next time we go. But I super encourage you as you go through, if you have questions, if you get blocked up, if you're unsure of anything, text me, email me, call me. We'll go through, we'll do another little mini one of this together. We'll work through it so that you feel like you've got a good character. Talk to each other, work through it with each other. It helps that you're in the same house. And again, the other videos that I sent you, D&D Beyond is great for self-exploring, but those two videos, they talk in more detail. Chris, you were asking a little bit more about races. We didn't get into them too much. You can either browse D&D Beyond, that's great, or you watch one of these videos. I find that they're really basic, helpful videos for helping you to understand a little bit about what each of the different races, pros, cons, strengths, and weaknesses are. There's a lot, but we'll get through it together. Our one shot, either we'll sort of come to a conclusion at the end of it, or we'll just have done so much role play that we'll have barely scratched the surface. Either of those outcomes is totally fine. It's all about just kind of learning the game and the mechanics. And anytime new folks are playing, there's a ton of learning at the beginning. But the fun thing about it also is once you get into it and you start doing it, it starts to become kind of easy kind of quickly. There's always stuff to know and learn, and I've been playing since I was in high school, and even still I have games where I'm like, wait, so am I allowed to do that? Oh, I add that bonus? Okay, that's how that works? Okay, I see that. And someone else in my campaign will go, oh no, Kristi, you can add 2 to that, because of this and that. And I go, oh yeah, I never knew that. So it's big, there's a lot, there's a ton, but once you start playing, you're going to get into the groove of it really quickly. The main thing for me is just allow yourself to role play. Don't be shy about diving into the character and allowing yourself to role play, because if you're doing that, you're going to end up having fun, and we're going to end up creating something fun together. Cool. Excellent. So I'll be in touch with you all individually or together, or however we want to do it before we start playing. We'll come up with a date for our first game. And again, do not hesitate to reach out to me between now and our first game so we can make your character as awesome as can be. Have a good night, everybody.